From the glistening lakes to the snow-capped mountains, New Zealand's South Island is absolutely breathtaking. With such idyllic scenery, you'd never think something sinister could ever happen here. However, nestled in a nearby valley on the west coast, there's a community of people so devoted to and brainwashed by their leader that they've given up all ties to the outside world. This reclusive community is known as Gloriaville, and what started out as a small, enthusiastic group of devout Christians over the years turned into a secretive and very disturbing cult with a twisted predator right at the center. Hey everyone, welcome or welcome back. My name is Summer Sanchez, and on this channel we talk about crime cults and heinous history. And today we're talking about the Gloriaville Christian community in New Zealand. I stumbled upon this cult when I was looking for cases to cover, and I came across a documentary called Gloriaville. This documentary was released in 2014, and it followed some of the members of this secluded fundamentalist group in their everyday lives. And in my opinion, it was a very surface level look into how this group lives. And while this particular documentary doesn't really dive into the more disturbing aspects of the group, you can still pick up on some major red flags. Like they talk about how they have arranged marriages. You can see that everyone, even the children, are required to wear uniforms. You learn how multiple families are forced to live together in hostels on Gloriaville property. And the leader is this little old man who looks like your average grandpa, but then you learn that he's the ultimate authority over all of these people.
We heard a young woman say she'd lay down her life for you.
Yes, she would.
Why would people here in the community lay down their lives for you?
Because they love you. That's why. It's a closer relationship than a relationship of family.
And so after I finished this documentary, I was like, okay, there has to be more to this story. These super tight-knit religious groups almost always have some abusive stuff going on behind closed doors. And sure enough, I started looking into it, and it turns out that Gloriaville is steeped in controversy. In fact, one of the leaders literally just pleaded guilty to some really bad stuff just like a month ago. So this is still ongoing. This group still exists to this day. There are still hundreds of people living in Gloriaville. So just keep that in mind as I'm going through everything throughout this video. There are still people living like this right now as we speak. And that is what we are talking about today. But before we get into the story, let's briefly talk about today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Wild Grain. Wild Grain is the first ever Bake from Frozen subscription box, and they offer baked goods and hand-cut pastas, and they ship them directly to your door. They offer so many different types of baked goods from small bakeries all over the country. They offer breads, pastas, pastries, seasonal pastries, cookies. Each box is fully customizable, and they're constantly offering new items. Like this month, I received a few of these little strawberry cheesecakes, and oh my god, they are so delicious. And what I really love about Wild Grain is that you don't have to wait for dough to rise or for items to thaw out before baking, because everything is baked from frozen and everything bakes within 25 minutes or less. So if you suddenly get a craving for some fresh baked sourdough bread, you don't have to put in the hard work of making it from scratch or wait for a loaf to thaw out. You just take your wild grain bread out of the freezer, pop it into the oven, and within 25 minutes you have warm, delicious sourdough bread. And it's almost fall, my favorite time of the year, and I can't wait to see the seasonal items that Wild Grain has planned for this year. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for more of those pumpkin cinnamon biscuits from last year. This month I got spinach and ricotta ravioli, sourdough bread, mini strawberry cheesecakes, croissants, peach pie bites, giant chocolate chunk cookies, and ham and cheese foldovers. And I wish that I could tell you from personal experience how the ham and cheese foldovers tasted, but my kids ate them all before I had the chance to try them out. But I can tell you that my kids loved them. Another favorite of ours this month were the peach pie bites. This was our first time trying these, and I followed the recommendation on the box, and we added some coarse sugar to the tops, and we absolutely loved these. They were like the perfect little treat. And Wild Grain is also committed to giving back because they donate 2 meals for every order to the Greater Boston Food Bank and other organizations fighting hunger. We love Wild Grain in our house. So far, we haven't had anything that we did not like. Everything we've tasted has been delicious and fresh, and best of all, it cannot be any easier to bake. And if you're ready to get your own Wild Grain subscription started, be sure to click the link in my description box and use my code SUMMER to get $30 off your first box, plus you'll get free croissants for life. A big thank you to Wild Grain for sponsoring this video, and now let's get into the case. Gloriaville Christian Community is located on the west coast of New Zealand's South Island, about an hour drive east of Greymouth. The community is currently made up of about 600 men, women, and children, and these people live together, they pray together, they work together, they do everything together. And they're almost completely cut off from the outside world. Many documentaries have been made about the people living in Gloriaville. I just mentioned one in the intro. And if you didn't know the dark truth behind this community, you might think think that they actually look happy. There's footage of the children playing outside with the beautiful scenery behind them. You'll see them eating together, the children playing and laughing, parents hugging their kids, and you'll also see this man. This is the founder and original leader of Gloriaville, Neville Cooper. And you might think that Neville looks like a sweet little old man. You can see him preaching and playing with the children, but Neville is anything but a sweet little old man. And the Gloriaville people are being forced to live a lie because they've been brainwashed into believing that their twisted way of life is not only normal, but it's the only way for them to live in order to get into heaven. From birth, they're taught that their people are the chosen people, and if they ever leave this community, their souls are automatically damned to hell. Neville Cooper was a sick man who created his own version of utopia where the people were treated like slaves, abuse is encouraged, and if you dare to even have an opinion, you risk severe punishment or even exile. But before we dive into all of the controversy surrounding this group, we need to talk about where it all started. So Neville Cooper was born in 1926 and he grew up in Queensland, Australia. And his parents were very strict. His father was extremely hard on Neville, and his mother was described as frugal and mean. His father owned a fruit shop, and Neville left school at the age of 12 so that he could go and help his father work at the fruit shop. Neville and his father did not get along, and by the time he was 16, his dad had kicked him out of the house. And that's pretty much all we know about Neville's childhood, so we are just going to skip ahead until he was about 20 years old. He joined the Air Force very briefly, and when he left the Air Force, it's believed that his mental health wasn't doing so great. His brother had died serving in the war, and it's thought that this really hit Neville hard. And so when he was about 20 or 21, he moved in with an aunt just to kind of, rest and recover and attempt to get his mental health back on track. But this is really when things started to go downhill, because it was during this time of recovery that Neville experienced some sort of religious awakening. And he claimed that God came to him and told him that his purpose was to preach the gospel by becoming a minister. Now, it's unclear if Neville was even religious at all before this so-called awakening happened, but either way, he completely threw himself into the Bible and he started attending church every week. And Neville's beliefs were extreme, like right out of the gate. He got really into hellfire and brimstone teachings. If you sinned, you were going to go to hell. If you did not live by the literal interpretation of the Bible, also hell. He believed that men were closer to God than women, and so women had to be subservient to their husbands always. And these are just a couple of examples, but you can see that very early on in his journey towards becoming the cult leader that he's destined to be, he already has this very hardcore fundamentalist set of beliefs. So he joins this church, and this is when he meets the woman who would become his wife, and her name was Gloria Perry. And actually, she wasn't technically a woman. She was still a teenager. She was either 15 or 16 when Neville married her, and he was 21. And Gloria has been described as just a really nice person. She was very sweet, she was quiet, and because she was so much younger than Neville, it was really easy for him to manipulate and control her. And so Gloria just kind of did whatever Neville told her to do, and she never really argued. They started having kids pretty quickly, and they go on to have a lot of kids. They ended up having a total of 16 kids over the course of their marriage. When Neville was 23, he decided that it was time for him to start his very own church, and not just any regular church. He wanted to become a traveling evangelist. And this meant that Neville would be away from Gloria and the kids for very long periods of time. He would be traveling from city to city, and he would preach his evangelical style of sermons wherever he went. And people said that Neville was extremely passionate, he was energetic, he was charismatic, and his message was simple: live a life free of sin, practice traditional family values, and live every day to serve God, or straight to hell you'll go.
This would be one of the worst ages for sin, deception, evil, to trick people away from the truth.
He named his traveling ministry the Voice of Deliverance, and he conducted the services out of this giant tent. He would travel from city to city. He would find a spot to set up this giant tent with the words, "The Voice of Deliverance," printed across the sides, and people would pop inside this tent to listen to what this guy had to say. And Neville actually started earning a name for himself. And when people would see his tent pop up, they would go inside and listen to him preach for hours. And before long, he started getting invited to go on tour with other religious leaders, and he would be gone for months months at a time. And he became kind of a big deal in the evangelical community. He eventually earned his pilot's license, and he started flying himself and other evangelical preachers on missions around the country. And then something happened that just confirmed in Neville's mind that he was special, that God wanted more from him. On Christmas Eve 1965, Neville and 3 others were flying just north of Brisbane when his plane experienced engine trouble and crashed. All 4 passengers survived the crash, and the media was calling this a miracle, which of course Neville absolutely loved and he totally leaned into. And like I said, this just confirmed to Neville that he was supposed to survive the crash so that he could do more with his ministry. And then in 1967, Neville and his family decided to move to New Zealand. And the same pattern continued on for a bit. He continued moving from church to church preaching, and then he eventually landed at the City New Life Church in Rangiora, New Zealand. And I'm really sorry because I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Neville never really stayed at any specific church for very long though, because he would inevitably start falling out with the church leaders. He wanted to run things his way, and his way was very strict, very extreme, and Neville felt like these other preachers just weren't on his level. He was just leagues above them in his devotion to God. And he would also do this thing where he would start attending a church and he would just like try to take over as the leader. And the actual leaders of these churches found this extremely annoying and also concerning, that this man felt like he was just entitled to come into their church and try to overthrow the current leaders. So in 1969, after falling out with the City New Life Church, Neville decided that it was finally time for him to build a Christian community of his own. Several members of the City New Life Church actually left to follow Neville. They wanted to be wherever he was because they truly believed that he could guide them on their spiritual journey because he had a special connection to God. Now, at first, his group did not have an actual church, so they would just hold services wherever they could around the Rangiora area, and they became known as the Cooperites. And this is really when all the trouble started, because Neville now has his own little following of people who are totally committed to him, and they believe that he is this very holy man who will put their lives on the right track. But that could not be further from the truth, because Neville Cooper is actually a very sick man, and this little religious group eventually morphs into a cult where hundreds of people are abused in every way imaginable. So by the late 70s, the Cooperites had finally found a place to settle. It was an area called Springbank in the town of on New Zealand's South Island, and this would be the home of his first commune. He called his Springbank commune the Christian Church at Springbank. Super creative name. And from this point on, Neville would progressively exert more and more power over his followers until ultimately he had total control over every aspect of their lives. Neville's idea of utopia was a place where men, women, and children lived together completely separated from the outside world. All of the members would work together to sustain the community. All of the cooking, the cleaning, the outdoor chores would be done by the members themselves. His vision has been described as a combination of, quote, Pentecostal values of exuberant personal faith in total communal life. So, first of all, Neville wanted all of his followers to live on the Springbank property because his ultimate goal was for his community to exist as their own little entity, like their own self-sustaining town. And before moving onto the property, the followers had to sell off their possessions and give their money to the church. Neville eventually established a governing body which consisted of shepherds and servants. So the hierarchy goes overseeing shepherd, which is Neville. Then there are just regular shepherds, and then beneath them are the servants. And then you have the general cult population, with the women being at the very bottom of the chain.
Stephen, what work do we need to do in pasture?
Have they gotten anywhere with trying plots of covered areas?
Hopeful is, as the founder, the person you might look to for primary leadership, and then there are shepherds, 5 shepherds.
Well, he is one of the 5.
He's one of the 5.
Yes.
And then servants, and then the people, as it were.
Yes.
A literal interpretation of the Bible is taught, and everyone in the group is supposed to live completely sin-free. This is a quote from their official website. All buildings must have a solid foundation, and ours is the written word of God. We settled on the authorized King James Bible as our only text. Our intention has never been to explain what it says to suit ourselves, but to simply read it and obey it. And these people can't even have an opinion of their own. They can't dress the way they want to. They can't have the jobs that they want. They can't even marry who they want to marry. There is zero individualism whatsoever. Neville wanted total uniformity, everyone looking the same, dressing the same, acting the same at all times. And Neville kept everyone in line using fear and shame. Fear of burning in hell for all eternity, eternity if they stepped 1 foot out of line. And if you or anyone in your family ever did anything that the leaders viewed as wrong or sinful, the entire family would be publicly shamed. So this created an environment where the followers were always trying to stay in Neville's good graces, and they would even tell on their own family members for the smallest things just to stay on Neville's good side, because if you were on Neville's good side, that meant you were on God's good side.
3 teenage boys who've never heard of iPods or Britney Spears.
Reddy, what do you think the outside world is like?
Evil, full of evilness and sin, and I don't want that in my life.
So what do you mean by evilness and sin?
Fornication and drug use and adultery, and the Bible says to be separate.
Can you ever see yourself living here?
No, I couldn't. I'd never leave here.
So you'll never experience the outside world?
No, I don't want to.
And you're quite content that you won't experience the rest of the world?
Yep, I love it here.
So the children from birth are taught to fear everything. They're told how evil the outside world is. They're told that they will go to hell if they sin.
I was told when I was a little girl that if I was living in the Old Testament times, I would be stoned with rocks constantly.
And the more severe the sin, the hotter the flames and the deeper into hell you would go. The children are taught right there on the cult property by other cult members.
2 of each kind of animal.
The Bible says that in the last days they will be willingly ignorant of 2 things: that the heavens were created by the word of God, that they were destroyed in the flood. Willingly ignorant. They didn't want to believe it. It didn't suit them to believe it, so they invented evolution.
Dinosaurs, they're pretty big things. How could they have fitted in the ark? Jordan?
If you take 2 of the younger ones, then they're smaller to fit in the ark.
Right, okay, so Noah didn't have to pick the biggest dinosaurs. He could have picked some baby ones.
There are no birthdays, no holidays, and this is a very male-dominated group. The women have to be completely subservient to the men in every way. They essentially are slaves to the men.
I draw strength from my husband. I love being a woman, and I love to be in subjection to him. The Bible said that it's not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him, and that's what I am.
It makes for peace and harmony. We don't have arguments or fights. It's God's plan. It says God is the head of Christ. Christ is the head of the man. The man is the head of the woman.
Women had to wear long skirts. They are not allowed to wear pants because that's considered masculine. And they have to wear long sleeves, and their tops have to go all the way up to their necks as to not show any skin on their chest. Also, no makeup, no jewelry, nothing that can be taken as vanity. They also have to wear head coverings, and the reason for the head coverings was to, quote, show that the women were in subjugation to the men and to remind them of their place within the hierarchy. Even if the children go swimming, the girls are required to keep their dresses on. And fun fact, the costume designer for The Handmaid's Tale said that she took inspiration from this cult when she was designing the costumes for the show. Neville wanted the women to dress modestly because, according to him, men could not be expected to control themselves around the women. So it was the woman's job to keep herself covered up completely so that she didn't tempt the men.
They've been taught the world is full of evil.
Aren't you curious to know what it would be like to live on the outside world?
Sometimes I think about it, but I've got the guidance of my parents who have lived in that world, and I believe what they tell me about it. And I know I'd much rather stay here, where the Spirit of God rules, where there's no crime. Yeah, I really love here. I love it here.
I think the way people are dressed is really ugly, and they have really hard looks on their face, and most of the time they don't look like they're happy. And I like getting back here where I can see people that are dressed nicely and happy and smiling.
What don't you like about the way people dress?
Well, the ladies don't dress very femininely. Looks like they're trying to dress like men, and it's not very modest.
And he put a lot of emphasis on elbows, like the women should never show their elbows because they might turn on the men. So I can only assume that he had an elbow fetish and he found elbows sexy. I don't know. The men also have a uniform. They have to wear a button-down shirt with a tie and long pants. He put the entire community on a strict schedule, so everyone has to eat all 3 meals together at a specific time every day. He assigned chores to each member of the community. The women will have to wake up between 2 and 6 a.m. every day, depending on which job they are assigned, and they'll have to do all the cooking for all 3 meals for tons of people, the cleaning, the laundry, wash the dishes, babysit the children, while the men do work around the property. And they also go on to work in the cult businesses. And they are forced to start doing hard labor at a very young age.
I enjoy doing all the work I do because I know it's to serve God and I'll get my reward in heaven.
On one of the documentaries, one of the young girls was working in the kitchen, and the interviewer asked her how long she had been working in the communal kitchen. And she said that she started working at the age of 5 years old.
What's your job?
Tomato sauce.
How old are you?
10.
How long have you been working in the kitchen?
5 years.
And if a man in the group ever voices an opinion different than the one that the leaders have, they'll be forced to go into something called a men's meeting. The disobedient member will be brought into a room and the leaders will just berate them until they finally break and bend to their will. And these meetings will go on all day and all night if they have to. And by the end, the person either has to bend to the will of the leaders and repent, or they will be punished. And like I mentioned in the intro, there are arranged marriages in this cult. Neville decides who marries who. And we'll talk about this more in detail in a bit because the marriage ceremonies are a whole bizarre thing that I need to tell you about in detail. So just put a pin in the arranged marriage thing. But he would encourage people to get married very young in order to manage their, quote, God-given sexual urges. The wives are not allowed to say no to sex ever. When they get married, they lose the right to say no. And if the husband asks them to do something, even if it's something they don't want to do, they have to do it. Giving consent is not a concept in this group. And Neville also believed that women should be allowed to marry as soon as they have their first period because physically they are considered a woman. But since New Zealand has laws against children getting married, he does make his people wait until they're at least 16.
Here's a problem. You've got children you call them children, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, a girl. She's capable of being a mum. Is she a child? To us, yes, she's called a child, but really she's a woman now. She's capable of being a mother. You've got a boy capable of being a father at 14.
Are you saying a 12-year-old girl is considered a woman?
In the sense of physical development, she's a woman.
When did you become an adult?
Probably when I was baptised, I reached the maturity that I knew where I was going and I had my life sorted out and I knew that I was going to serve God.
How old were you then?
10.
10? So at 10 you would have said you became an adult?
Yep.
So I was 10 when I started my period. So in the eyes of Neville Cooper and the sick men that he had in his inner circle, I would have been considered a woman at 10 years old and therefore ready for marriage and everything that comes with that responsibility. But because Neville knows that if he starts marrying off little girls, they will get into legal trouble, he makes them wait. So it's not that they are against pedophilia. They just don't want the public and legal backlash from forcing children to get married. A book called What We Believe was written by one of the shepherds, and this book outlined all of the cult's beliefs and what's expected of them as members of the Gloria community. And this book became extremely important to the cult. It's like their own little cult Bible, and everyone has to live by that book. The members are even expected to sign what they call a commitment to the church. And the commitment is basically a promise to live a life of servitude, always obey the leaders, live a sin-free life. Now, once Neville started controlling the way people dressed and arranging marriages, this is when some of the original members decided to leave the community. They could see that this was getting way too weird and controlling, and it seemed like every day Neville was putting new rules into place. Some of the members started to compare Neville to Jim Jones in the People's Temple. So, thankfully, some of those original followers did manage to get out while they still could, but the others were not so lucky. Most of the original members remained, and they were in for decades of abuse, and their children and their children's children would be born into Neville's twisted world, and they would suffer as well. And this goes for Neville's own children as well, because as you probably guessed, he was not the greatest husband and father. He was physically abusive towards his children, and probably Gloria as well. I'm not 100% sure on that. But knowing what I know and how the other wives are treated, I'm sure that he beat Gloria as well. But he would definitely beat his children if they ever got out of line. He was especially hard on his sons. They got it the worst when it came to the physical abuse. And he taught his followers to discipline their families the same way he did his. According to former members, physical abuse is a huge problem within this group. Most of the men beat their wives and their children all the time, and the children are brought up to think that this is completely normal. And since they're completely cut off from the outside world, they have nothing to compare it to.
When growing up and being beaten and having a violent dad becomes the norm and it doesn't affect you anymore, you get to that place where it becomes our strength. You begin to say within yourself, try and break me. Every time you beat me, I will not flinch. I will not cry. Try and break me. And you become proud of the fact that you can take whatever is dished up. You can take it and you can be strong.
The teachers at the school would even beat the children if they misbehaved during lessons. The children just live in constant fear of being physically punished and fear of going to hell, because Neville would constantly be telling them that they would go to hell if they ever sinned or if they ever left the group. And it just progressively gets worse from here, because many of the former members have come forward with allegations of rampant sexual abuse occurring within the cult. Neville wanted sex to be something that everyone knew about from a very young age, and he wanted it to be discussed openly, which is such a stark contrast from the environment that he had established within the cult, like boys and girls not being able to mingle with each other, the girls having to completely cover up, but at the same time, he's sexualizing everything. So first of all, the men would be very touchy with the women, while the women and the girls would be up serving, everyone during mealtime, refilling their glasses, serving them food. They would be getting groped by some of the men. The leaders were the worst offenders when it came to this type of abuse, and they would be doing this out in the open, sometimes with their wives and children sitting at the table with them. A girl comes by their table to serve them food or drink. The man will be groping them as they pass. They would be wrapping their arms around their waists, rubbing their bodies. They would untie their dresses as they walked away. And the girls can't do anything about this. They've been taught to never question a man, that they aren't worthy of having even an ounce of bodily autonomy. So they feel like they have no choice but to just stand there and let this happen. It's truly heartbreaking. And the other men in the cult would be seeing the leaders doing this, and that would signal to them that this type of behavior was okay, and they would start doing the same type of thing. The girls feel like it's their fault when the men do this, because they've been taught that the men can't be expected to control themselves, and so it must be something that they are doing to entice them.
Girls are always told they are to blame if there is any sexually inappropriate behavior.
But as bad as all of that is, it doesn't even scratch the surface, because it just gets so much worse. Neville started encouraging mothers and fathers to have sex with each other in front of their children. He wanted the children to know all about sex, for them to be ready and knowledgeable when it came time for them to get married. So he would tell his followers to do it in front of their own children. This would start at a very young age. We're talking like 6 or 7 years old, being forced to watch your parents have sex. Neville also started counseling married couples in group counseling sessions, and during these sessions he would have all of the couples lay out blankets in this big room, and he would just tell them to have sex with their spouses in front of each other while he watched. But it just gets even weirder, because then he started inviting young newlywed couples over to his and Gloria's for dinner. And this was actually just an excuse to get these people alone so that he could violate the young wives. He would have the husbands lie down on the bed next to his wife, Gloria, and Gloria and the husband would have to just lay there and watch as Neville undressed the wife and touched her all over her body. He even did this to his own children and their their spouses. One of his sons, Phil, and his wife Sandy were invited to have dinner with Neville and Gloria on multiple occasions. And every time the evening ended the same way. Neville would make Phil lie down on the bed next to Gloria, his own mother, and Phil and Gloria would watch as Neville took off Sandy's clothes and he violated her body. Phil and Sandy hated this. They dreaded every single dinner invitation that they received from Neville, but he was their leader and he was also Phil's father, and so they were afraid of the consequences of refusing. And Phil felt like he had let his wife down because he had allowed his father to violate her and he did nothing about it. And over time, this started causing issues within their marriage. But this was not the first time that Phil had been subjected to his father's predatory behavior. When Phil was still a teenager, he had confided in Neville that he was having some pain in his testicles and it was starting to worry him. Neville asked Phil to show him where the pain was, and so Phil pulls down his pants to show his father, and then Neville proceeded to assault his own son. And Phil was so confused and disgusted, but again, he felt like he couldn't say anything. He couldn't do anything to go against his father. Phil believes that Neville did similar things to his brothers, but we don't really know the extent of the sexual abuse within the family. Another disgusting ritual of Neville's involved a pool, pornography, and teenage girls. There was a spa room on the property and there was a pool in there, and Neville and the other shepherds would go into the pool completely naked. They would have a pornographic movie playing on a projector, and they would force some of the teenage girls to strip down and get into the pool with them. Neville tried to justify all of this by saying that, they were just preparing the girls for marriage and teaching them what they needed to do for their husbands.
The way he saw of educating young people, couples, he would, train them and demonstrate sexual acts in front of them.
Do you mean he'd become involved in intimate situations?
He would become involved. He would have girls in the spa with him.
Clothed?
No, unclothed.
And now let's talk about the arranged marriages in more detail because it's a whole big, bizarre process. So first of all, the women don't get to decide when they get married. They have to wait for a man to request a wife from the leaders. When a young man is ready to get married, he has to go to the leaders and tell them that he's ready. He has zero say in who he marries. They believe that God gets to choose.
So do you choose your partner, or how does that work?
God chooses them for me. All the marriages here are lasting. We don't have any divorce, no split marriages, because God's will is perfect. He'll put you with someone that's just perfect for you.
Are you in love with her?
No, I wouldn't say I was in love with her.
Did you have your eye on him at all?
Not at all. I was willing to wait. We don't have our eye on the young men. We walk, meekly and quietly and just doing our thing, trusting in the Lord. That's our business, trust in the Lord, and the Lord will work out the rest.
The leaders keep a list of the bloodlines in the cult so there isn't any inbreeding happening, and they also try to find a girl who is within the same age range as the guy. And so they end up with a short list of potential brides, and then they all go home and pray separately about it. The man, the leaders, they all go home and pray, and allegedly God reveals to them who the bride will be. Then they all meet back up and they talk about who they believe God chose for them, and that is how a wife is chosen. Most of the time, the couple doesn't even know each other at all. They've never even spoken to one another.
You didn't know her at all?
I did. I knew her as a sister in Christ, but I didn't have any special feelings towards her. It was nothing to do with me. It was nothing to do with the flesh.
You have to admit she's very pretty, though.
She is, very. But even if she wasn't, I would still accept it because it's God's will, and I know that his will is true and perfect.
So then the man goes to the woman and he asks her for her hand in marriage, and then she goes and prays about it, and then she'll come back with her answer.
I chose to love whoever God wanted me to marry, and it was a decision you make. And it's not hard, it's easy.
This is really just a formality, though, because as we've established, the women have no say whatsoever in anything that happens, and so they don't really have a choice. An announcement is made to the cult, and now they are engaged, and now they are allowed to stand next to each other and talk to each other, but still nothing sexual, not even a kiss. They court for a bit, maybe like a month or so, and then it's time for a big wedding. The bride can choose between a standard blue dress or a pink version. This is the only time they get to deviate from their regular uniforms. A big ceremony is held in front of the church. They exchange vows, and then once it's official, they finally get to have their first kiss. Then some creepy songs are sung by some of the girls, and the lyrics are basically, you belong to him, you are his, you better obey him and treat him right. That's basically the entire message of these ceremonies.
You are fair, you will be good to him, and not evil, all the days of your life, you will be good to him, you are fair.
Now, this woman or teenager is this man's property. And if that isn't bad enough, the wife has to sign away her right to ever say no to anything sexual in the marriage. Basically, she has to agree to be her husband's sex slave.
What we believe tells the people of Gloriavale they must obey the leaders and submit themselves willingly to them as unto the Lord. So, Gloriavale's leaders are equal to God. And so too are husbands, to whom wives must submit themselves as unto the Lord and obey them in all things. Which leads us to an extraordinary command, and this is verbatim. Husbands and wives do not have the right to withhold themselves sexually from one another.
And it actually goes further than that. I know it does mention husband and wife, but most of the teaching and most of the way the whole vibe we got from Hopeful was that the wife is not allowed to say no to the husband.
Mm-hmm. Your job as a wife is to make sure your husband's never going to have an excuse to be unfaithful. And so you have to give them everything, anywhere, anytime.
Where does this leave women in Gloriavale in terms of their ability to consent or not?
Doesn't exist. It's not a word that exists in Gloriavale, not a concept. You have no right.
Okay, so now the ceremony is done. Everyone is singing and hugging and praising God. And then in the middle of the reception, the new husband and wife are led out onto a carriage and it's driven by a child. And this child drives them over to this little honeymoon suite. The new couple then have to go consummate their marriage in the middle of the reception and then come back out to rejoin the party. And apparently, Neville would sometimes be present in the room during some of the consummation ceremonies. So things just continue like this for the next several years. The cult is extremely reclusive. There's rampant abuse going on throughout the group. And the number of members just keeps going up because more and more babies are being born every year. However, over the years, most of Neville's own children start leaving. Out of 16 children, only 4 of them ended up staying and the rest managed to escape. Some of the members who had been born and raised there and who were now raising children of their own, they were worried because they knew that if they didn't get their kids out when they were young, they would suffer the same abuse that they had growing up. The remaining members are told to completely cut the levers out of their lives.
If we've got to make a choice between our loved ones and what God wants us to do, what are we going to do? We'll follow God and we'll go where God wants us to go.
And the women in Gloriavale are expected to just keep having babies. They believe that they are supposed to have as many babies as God gives them. So no contraceptives are ever allowed under any circumstances. Even if the mother has a medical condition that could cause either her death or the baby's death, she's still not allowed to even attempt any method that might prevent her from getting pregnant. If a woman had a medical issue where she had to see an actual doctor and not one of the cult midwives, and she had been advised by her doctor not to have any more children because it could be life-threatening for her or the baby, well, Neville Cooper would make the woman write a letter to her doctor informing them that she still planned to continue having babies, and instead of taking their medical advice, she would be putting all of her trust in God. With all the babies being born in the cult every year, there are times when things don't go to plan and there are complications. And the leaders will give permission for those mothers to be transported to the closest hospital, and she will give birth there. there. But what happens when even after medical intervention, the baby doesn't survive? Well, the mother is brought back to the cult. She's given no emotional support from the community, and she's expected to go right back to work. No time to process the trauma she's just gone through, no time to grieve her child. And not only that, but she's also made to believe that it's her fault that her baby has died because she didn't put enough faith in God and he must be punishing her. And the community basically acts as if there never was a baby at all. It's just totally forgotten. One of the books that I read on this case was written by a former member. Her name is Theo Pratt, and Theo's mother and father were both pretty young when they joined the cult and they had an arranged marriage. There were some issues going into the marriage, but they still went on to have 9 children together. Now, sadly, one of the 9 children was stillborn. He was a son that they named Samuel, and Theo's mother had given birth to him in a hospital. And when she was discharged, she was sent back with a small box that contained Samuel's body. Now, of course, Theo's mom was completely devastated, and she was obviously still in mourning. She had just lost her child a day or two earlier. But was she given any time to grieve the loss of her child and recover physically? No. Of course she wasn't. First of all, the leaders showed up at her room. She is understandably in bed, distraught, but they had no sympathy. They hadn't come to check in on her. They were just there to take Samuel's body from her. And when she asked where they were taking him, they wouldn't even tell her. Of course, it's not healthy to just hold on to a body for a long period of time, but they could have at least held a funeral for Samuel and had a proper burial. This would have given the family a place to go and visit, but instead they wouldn't even tell her what they had done with his body. Apparently, the leaders have all the stillborn babies buried separately in an overgrown, basically forgotten portion of the property. They aren't buried with the rest of the members of the community. This is likely where Samuel was buried, but even to this day, it's not 100% known where he is. And Theo's mom was made to believe that she had done something to anger God and Samuel had died because of her. After Samuel was taken, the leaders forced Theo's mom right back to work. She was expected to just pick herself up, dust herself off, and completely turn off her grief. The women in Gloriaville are expected to run on autopilot. They are like robots because they have been taught to just stay sweet and comply and never cause any trouble or have a thought or opinion of their own. Life isn't good for anyone in this cult for sure. It's awful for everyone, but there is no doubt that the women and the young girls have it the worst. They're treated like slaves. They're treated like pieces of meat for the men to do whatever they want.
You don't have to answer this question, but were you sexually abused?
Yeah.
And there's no way out for you, is there?
No. You actually learn not to say anything, not to tell anyone, because then you become ostracised. I know I've got some dear friends that were never allowed to get married because what happened to them got public and they were ostracised for it, and
The victims were blamed.
It damaged them for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
How common is it, do you think, Victory?
Very. And I know above me and below me, dozens and dozens of women who were sexually abused as girls and teenagers.
In the early 90s, with the group constantly expanding, Neville made the decision to move the cult to an even more isolated area of New Zealand. He purchased a giant plot of land on the west coast of New Zealand's South Island. It's about an hour's drive east of Greymouth. Neville had a few large hostels built on the property to house all the members, meaning that several families live together in each hostel. These are very tight living quarters. Parents and children sleep in the same room. Now, right before the move to the new location, Neville's wife Gloria passed away. She had a brain tumor. And so in her honor, Neville named their new commune Gloriaville Christian Community. Neville had 2 wives after Gloria passed. His first wife after Gloria died not too long after they got married. She was in her 80s. But his third wife was only 17 years old, and Neville would have been in his 60s when they got married.
Who married his third wife, Ruth, in his late 60s. She was just 17. They have 4 children under 14 and another on the way.
And this is also around the time that Neville had everyone change their name to something meaningful, and he chose the name Hopeful Christian. Examples of other names are Willing Disciple, Steadfast Joy, Faithful Pilgrim. One of the little girls in the cult was actually named Submissive. They actually named a little baby girl Submissive.
On Paradise Courage. Devoted. Miserable, cycle, delightful, perpetual, vigilant, stand fast, believing.
And Gloriaville is worth a lot of money. They have their hands in several very profitable businesses. They own a massive dairy farm. They own planes that they provide short flights around New Zealand. They have a deer processing business, and all of their businesses together bring in millions of dollars per year. The dairy business alone brings in at least a couple of $1 million every year. The cult members operate all of these businesses, and guess how much they're paid for working upwards of 70 hours per week or more? Just guess. If you guess $0.00, you would be correct. Neville built an entire community of people who worship him and run all of his super profitable businesses for zero pay. He says that they actually do get paid because they are living rent-free on the commune. They don't pay for their health care or food. All of their needs are met. And so in his eyes, that's payment enough.
Can you tell me what the value of this community is?
You look around and you'd say 18 million.
Does anyone get paid?
No, this is their pay. Your pay is, yes, you're getting a house when you get married. You're going to have rooms when you get married. You're going to be provided for when your babies are born. All your expenses are going to be paid. Your medical expenses are going to be paid.
But if you leave, you walk away with nothing.
Yeah, but the point is you've had a provision made in life here that if you go out into society and you took a job to get everything you get here, you'd have nothing left to take away anyhow.
And like I said, these people start working at a very young age. This is slave labor that is being forced on everyone down to the children. Now, not long after they got settled into their new Gloriaville property, one of the former members came forward with some very disturbing allegations against Neville Cooper. This person's name was Yvette Olson, and she had been a member back at the Springbank property in the 80s. And she had managed to escape the cult, and then years later, she very courageously went to the police to report that she had been sexually assaulted by Neville Cooper. And what Neville did to this woman was horrific. In the early 80s, Yvette was 16 years old, and she had developed what they have referred to as a secret friendship with a 14-year-old boy named Tim. She and Tim ended up running away from Springbank together, but they were eventually tracked down and they were dragged right back to the community. Neville then forced Yvette and Tim to get married in a secret ceremony, and keep in mind, this is a 16 and 14-year-old we're talking about. He didn't allow them to live together at first. For the first 2 years, they lived with their parents, and over the course of those 2 years, Neville set out on a campaign to totally destroy Yvette's self-worth. He would constantly force her to call herself degrading names like harlot. She would be made to constantly beg Neville for forgiveness for escaping. And then after the 2 years, Neville decided that Yvette and Tim had to go through marriage counseling before they could actually be together. And guess who would be conducting those counseling sessions? Neville himself. So he started counseling these two kids. He would counsel them together, and he would also counsel them each separately. And during the counseling sessions where Yvette was alone, Neville started abusing her in a very bizarre and brutal way. He would force Yvette to lie down on a bed, and then he would assault her with a long wooden object soaked in oil. And he told her that he had measured Tim's genitals to make sure that he made the wooden object just the right size. If that's true, then who knows what terrible things were happening during Tim's counseling sessions. This went on for 3 days straight, and if Yvette even tried to get up, he would just push her back down on the bed. And he told her that she had to let this happen or he would make it to where she and Tim could never be together. Years later, Yvette ended up escaping with Tim and their child, and she made the decision to go to the police after her niece confided in her that she had been assaulted multiple times by a Gloriaville man when she was a child. Finding out about what her niece had went through gave Yvette the push that she needed to tell her story and, try to get some change to happen. However, that's not really what happened at all. Police did raid Gloriaville in 1994 and Neville was arrested. He claimed that he had just simply given Yvette the wooden object to use on herself as therapy. 4 other victims came forward with allegations as well, and Neville's son Phil, who was out of the cult at this point, he ended up testifying against his father, and he told the court all about the sexual abuse that he had suffered at the hands of his dad. And in the end, Neville was convicted of 10 counts of indecent assault and sentenced to 6 6 years in prison, which is already a slap in the face, but it gets worse. Because Neville appealed, he was granted a new trial, and this time he was only found guilty of 3 of the charges, and he was sentenced to 5 years. But he was released from prison after serving less than 2 years. Now, Neville's followers back at Gloriaville, because they are cut off from the outside world, they have no idea what Neville actually was convicted of. And they were being fed lies by the leaders, essentially pushing the narrative that Neville was just being persecuted for spreading God's word, and that's why he was in prison.
We got told that it was people who had left that were bitter and angry and just wanted to destroy our faith, and they wanted to persecute Hopeful for being Christian, and so that's why he had gone to jail. The Lord had heard our prayers and he had destroyed the intentions of the wicked men that had put Hopeful in prison. So, I can remember it being an exciting thing that he was back.
And the leaders would go to great lengths to keep the followers ignorant to news from the outside world. The cult would get loads of old newspapers from town, and they would use those newspapers to start the fires in the kitchens and stuff. But before the leaders would give the followers the newspapers to use, they would go through and cut out all of the articles that they didn't want them to see. So the followers would get the papers and they would open them up, and there would be giant pieces missing. That is some tedious work, all to ensure that the people have no clue what's actually happening outside of the Gloriaville bubble. And Neville never lost control of the cult. Even while he was in prison, he continued to send orders and stuff from behind bars. So when he was released, he just went right back to Gloriaville. And now he looked like even more of a hero. His followers thought that he had just been persecuted for being a Christian. It truly makes me sick. But the legal troubles didn't end there, because over the years, Gloriaville has been in and out of the news with allegations ranging from slave labor to sexual assault.
Yeah, they're brothers and sisters and cousins. Yeah, this is where we are.
It's a remarkable insight into their lives. This 20 square metre space, home for 6.
So where does everybody sleep?
All right. Where's the big boy? Faithful sleeps up there. He's king of the roost. They get all the privacy they really want. But we're having a lot of fun. You're in here at night and you're with the kids, and middle of the night, everything that's happening, they're in the middle of it.
Even sex?
Even?
Sex?
No, the kids aren't involved in that. Nothing like that.
Because that's one of the criticisms of some people who've lived here, that children are exposed to their parents having sex.
Well, that's... They can say all sorts of things. You've got kids jumping into bed. These kids, they jump into bed at night in the middle of the night and everything. Yeah, well, they're cuddling mum, and dad could be cuddling mum and everything and all that, but no. So...
And there have also been some questionable deaths that have happened in Gloriaville. In 2015, Gloriaville made headlines once again after one of the members tragically passed away. So each of the hostels on the Gloriaville property have what they call an isolation room, and these rooms serve as a quarantine space for people who are sick. Sickness spreads extremely quickly within the Gloriaville community because everyone is living in such tight quarters. So they have this room that sick people will stay in until they get better. And one day back in June of 2015, a child died in one of the isolation rooms. A 14-year-old girl named Prayer Reddy had come down with an illness, and she'd been sent to the isolation room. That evening, her dinner was delivered to her in the isolation room. Now, Prayer had Down syndrome, and she would struggle to chew her food properly, and so she would need someone to cut her food into small pieces to make it more manageable for her to eat. Prayer's mother, Sharon, had been in the isolation room with her at the time, but she was heating up her own dinner in the microwave, and she had her back turned to Prayer, and so she didn't notice that Prayer's food wasn't cut up properly before she started eating. And before Sharon knew it, Prayer began to choke on a piece of meat. Now, Sharon did not know what to do in this situation, and so she was in a panic. There was one other adult in the room at the time, and this person did try to help, dislodge the food from Prayer's throat, but he was unsuccessful. And so they needed to get out to go get help. But there was a problem. They were trapped in the room because the door handles had been disabled to prevent them from getting out. Eventually, someone climbed out of a window and started yelling for help. And while this person went for help, Sharon was just standing there in a panic, just helplessly watching in horror as her child was dying. And very sadly, by the time help arrived, it was too late, and 14-year-old Prayer Reddy lost her life. Sharon was, of course, absolutely devastated. Prayer was her youngest child, and she was like her pride and joy. They were so close. Now, according to former members, it was common practice for the leaders to disable the door handles in the isolation room. They claimed that this was to prevent the young children from accidentally walking into the room where all the sick people were, potentially exposing themselves to whatever illness they had. But even if this is truly the reason, it's still extremely dangerous to trap people inside of a room with no easy access to the outside. And apparently, some of the other cult members had brought up this concern in the past, but they were ignored. The cult tried to cover up Prayer's death for a while. They got a suppression order from the courts, but eventually that was lifted and people wanted answers. News stations started covering it, and this really pissed Neville off. Neville hated the media, and he was always demonizing the media to his followers and blaming the media for just asking questions and reporting on things that he wanted to keep quiet. We hear the same sort of rhetoric from a prominent cult leader over here in America as well.
I have to put the question.
No, Janet, we're not going into that. That's right. With all these things, our people are not into it. They're not into it.
The sexual assault.
No, we're not into it. They want to believe what they want to believe. They want to say what they want to say. They can turn anything good into evil. Anything they can turn that into evil.
You don't deny it?
I've told you before. People will believe what they want to believe.
An inquest into Prayer's death was conducted, and it was ultimately ruled that the fact that the door handles had been disabled played no part in Prayer's death because they had access to a window, which many people do not agree with, myself included. If that door would have been accessible, Sharon could have ran out the door and ran for help the second that she noticed Prayer was choking. Even a few seconds of a delay can be the difference between life and death in a situation like this. But that was that. Gloria Bell had no fault in Prayer's death, and they just wanted to forget about it. And do you want to know what Neville said to Prayer's father, Clem Reddy, right after he buried his daughter? Neville told Clem that at least now that Prayer was dead, she wouldn't be molested by the other church members. He had the nerve to tell a grieving father that he should take comfort that his daughter was gone because now she wouldn't be assaulted by the people they were supposed to trust most. That is sick.
Hopeful came up to me and said, in a serious comment, that I could take comfort in the fact that she now would not be sexually molested by anybody in the community. His attitude shook me.
And then in 2018, the death of another Gloria Bell member occurred under strange circumstances when a 20-year-old man named Sincere Stantrue was found unresponsive in the Gloria Bell paint shop where he was assigned to work. And it's widely believed that he died by suicide. He was airlifted to a hospital where he was put on a ventilator, but sadly he never regained consciousness and he passed away. Sincere's sister Rose has said that he was treated horribly by the community. Neville especially had it in for Sincere. Sincere was deaf, and so when Neville would give the boys an order, he wouldn't be able to hear him, and this would piss Neville off, and likely because the other boys picked up on the animosity coming from their leader, they took Neville's lead and they started bullying Sincere as well. They would exclude him, they would call him names, they would mock him, and because of this, Sincere would shy away from others. He was always worried that they were just mocking him. Rose has described her brother as very smart, he was loving and kind, but as he got older, he had to deal with the bullying more and more, and he started to lash out. His temper would flare from time to time, and he had a tendency to be impulsive. So in an attempt to control his impulsiveness, Sincere started walking around with his hands in his pockets. But this is actually against Gloria Bell rules. Neville didn't want the boys putting their hands in their pockets, and so Sincere would get into more trouble. His mother actually ended up sewing the pocket shut on all of his pants. But the bullying just got worse. Sincere would be harassed by the other boys in the bathrooms. They would lock him inside of the stalls. He would be picked on by the teachers in front of the other students as well. He was made fun of for his hearing aids, and so then he would take out the hearing aids, but then he would get into more trouble because he couldn't hear anything the teachers were saying. He also told his sister Rose that his boss down at the cult paint shop had beaten him with a pipe. And there are reports that Sincere had been the victim of sexual abuse as well. His father later even admitted to knowing telling about at least one instance of this. And then just 2 months before his death, Sincere had been removed from his parents' home in the hostel, and he was forced to go live in the men's room with the older men in the cult, which just further isolated him from his peers and his family. According to Rose, the men's room was seen as a disgrace because only the single men lived there, men whose wives had left them and escaped from the cult, also men who had been married on the outside but they had left their families to join Gloriaville, and the men who had just never been allowed to marry. And this is the category that Sincere fell in. Sincere had approached the leaders about being assigned a wife on multiple occasions, but he had been denied every time. And he had never been allowed to sign the commitment, and if you didn't sign the commitment, you weren't allowed to get married. So here is this 20-year-old man. Most of his peers had signed the commitment years earlier. They had already gotten married, started families. And from birth in this cult, you're told that your entire value as a person is judged by your standing as a Christian and your ability to have a family. This is what would get you into heaven, according to Neville. And Sincere has just been denied the right to do both. That would have been devastating. He would have been made to feel totally worthless. Rose has said that now that she has left the cult and she's learned more about the outside world, she believes that Sincere had autism. And that's heartbreaking because he was obviously struggling. He was very intelligent, but he struggled to verbalize things. Plus, he was deaf, which just added even more frustration to the situation. And instead of being supported and nurtured, he was ostracized and bullied by not just the children, but the so-called Christian leaders and teachers. And once Sincere was sent to live in the men's room, his visitation with his family became very limited, and he was forced to spend time with the older single men unless he was working in the paint shop. And then just 2 months after he was sent to the men's room, he was dead. Now, an inquest into Sincere's death was conducted, and dozens of people were interviewed about his treatment by the others, his state of mind leading up to his death, because the coroner was trying to determine if this was self-inflicted or if it was the result of some mysterious accident. His sister Rose and some of the others who had broken from the cult testified that he had been treated horribly and his state of mind was not good at the time of his death, while the current members were saying the exact opposite. He was happy and he wasn't bullied at all. And in the end, the coroner determined that Sincere's cause of death was accidental and likely caused by a blacking out game that had allegedly been very popular around Gloriaville at the time. The Gloriaville people told the coroner that the teenagers in the cult would restrict each other's airways, which causes a euphoric effect. I'm sure that some of you remember doing this when you were younger, but as far as we know, Sincere had never been seen doing this. Now, Rose is understandably upset by the ruling, and she believes that the investigation fell short, so maybe, hopefully, we'll see a deeper look sometime in the future. This ruling just happened in March of this year, 2025, so we'll see if any more comes from this part of the story. Several allegations of physical abuse against Gloriaville members have also come up over the years. Connie Reddy is one of Clem and Sharon Reddy's children. Prayer was her little sister. Connie ran away from the cult after Prayer passed away, and in 2018, she went to the police with allegations of child abuse against her father, Clem. Clem, like most of the other dads in Gloriaville, would beat his children for any little thing. Connie has said that she and her siblings, including her little sister Prayer, who had Down syndrome, would be severely beaten, sometimes for doing nothing at all. Sometimes Clem was just in a bad mood, and so he would come home and take his anger out on his wife and kids.
One of your brothers told me that he had enough on your father that he could have put him in prison for the beatings on him, but for whatever reason he didn't go to the police. You have had the courage to do that. What do you want to see happen to your father?
Definitely accountability, and really as a statement towards Gloriaville. I know that they will try and isolate this and make this all about my dad and this one individual within our community who acts like this, but really it's about the wider picture, being able to use what happened to me to stop it happening to anybody else, being able to have Gloriaville accountable for what they do, not just sweep it under the mat anymore.
Clem would later blame his actions on the culture within the cult, that the fathers should physically discipline their wives and children, and the fact that he was working 70 hours a week at one of the cult businesses, and he was just mentally and physically exhausted, and that added to the problem. Clem ended up pleading guilty to the charges, and he was given 12 months supervision, and he also paid Connie $1,000 in damages. And he was also ordered to take part in counseling sessions, and Clem has said that being convicted of assaulting his children had caused him to reflect on not just his own actions, but also how the cult as a whole operates, the way they push men to violently discipline their children, the rampant sexual abuse of the girls.
Clem says he followed the lead of Gloria Vale's shepherds, disciplining his children physically, until he was convicted of assaulting them.
This was a turning point for me in my life.
Reddy said the conviction made him reassess life inside Gloria Vale.
With what Hopeful and the males in the community were practicing, that did not sit well with my beliefs. This related to the sexual attitude towards my wife and daughters.
And so he started asking the leaders questions and kind of pushing back, and they did not like that. Instead of listening to his concerns and making changes, the leaders instead just kicked Clem out of the cult. But Sharon and Clem had been in the cult for decades, and they had dozens of children and grandchildren still in the cult. And also prayer was buried on Gloria Vale property. And so they just couldn't bring themselves to leave completely. And so they got some of their things and they started walking until they came to an old building that the cult used to use for one of their businesses. And they started living out of that building.
In spite of the leadership wanting Sharon and I to be gone from the community, we still live there.
The couple challenged the leadership over conditions in the community and were evicted from their hostel.
We are uninvited guests living here in rather awkward circumstances.
So they're not technically in the cult any longer, but they still live on cult property. And Clem and Sharon both later testified against Gloria Vale leadership in a multi-million-dollar court case in 2022. After some former members came forward in 2017 and again in 2020 about the forced labor within this cult, 2 investigations by government agencies were conducted. And somehow the labor inspectorate on both occasions came to the conclusion that there is no employment relationship that exists within Gloria Vale as defined by New Zealand employment law, that these people were actually volunteers, even after hearing reports of children as young as 5 years old working long hours. How did they come to that conclusion?
I'm disgusted by Crown law, and they need to have a real hard look at themselves, because how did they let their name go into a report published by the inspectorate saying women born into slavery are volunteers? No one volunteers to be a slave.
But 2 multi-million-dollar lawsuits were brought against Gloria Vale in 2022 and again in 2023. Some of the former members were pushing to get someone to acknowledge the fact that they were not volunteers, that they were born into slave labor. They felt like they had been born to be kept in a lifetime of servitude, made to work their lives away for no pay to keep millions in the leaders' bank accounts. If they were found to be volunteers, then that was case closed. But if they were found to be employees, then Gloria Vale would owe a lot of people a lot of money for years of hard labor. Now, the church argued that the members are not employees, that they are actually volunteers. They claimed that these former members had made a choice to work their lives away for the Lord, that they had even signed that commitment, so that was proof that they did it on their own free will. But as the women pointed out, they were born into the cult. They never joined freely, and they had been brainwashed since birth that they had to sign that commitment or they would go to hell.
If you want to be a member of the community at Gloria Vale, you have to live by the rules.
I was born
the
there. I didn't join.
No. But you signed the commitment when you were 20, and then you re-signed the commitment in 2019.
Yes, but I was conditioned and primed for it.
They are groomed from birth that they'll be married, and as soon as they are married, to provide unlimited sex to their husbands, to become pregnant and become mothers of many children, and indoctrinated to be cheap sweatshop-style labour, underpinning the whole financial structure of the community.
Thankfully, the court agreed with the former members. These people are not volunteers. They were, in fact, employees. And I think it's safe to say that Gloria Vale owes these people a lot of money in back pay. This was a major win for the victims. And it also showcased the serious issue of forced labor, forced child labor that had been happening in that cult since the 1960s. In 2018, Neville Cooper died of cancer at the age of 92, but unfortunately the cult has endured.
Where do you think your father will finish up?
When he does come to meet his maker, he's going to have to give an account for his life. I would just hate for what he's done and how he's hurt people and how many lives he's destroyed to be in his shoes.
He's going to be standing before God, and he's got to answer for every one of those people whose lives he destroyed. And then he's going to go to hell.
And since his passing, there have been so many more allegations of sexual abuse brought out against people in the cult. In 2022, 43-year-old Joseph Hope was charged with assaulting a girl under the age of 12. The victim said that Joseph would hold her down and simulate sex. He also groped her several times, and at least one of the assaults happened while his wife and children were in the same room. He pleaded guilty to 1 charge of sexual violation and 3 charges of indecent assault, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Also in 2022, 41-year-old Timothy Disciple pleaded guilty to assaulting a 12-year-old girl in the back of a van in 2005. He also confessed that he had done similar things to 2 other young victims over the years, and in total he pleaded guilty to 7 charges. He was initially sentenced to 2 years and 5 months, but it was reduced down to only 21 months. Next up is this man, Fervent Ben Canaan. Between 2004 and 2018, Fervent would sneak into the young girls' beds at night and violate them while they were sleeping. He would abuse them while they were babysitting other younger kids in the cult, and he pleaded guilty to 8 counts and was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. But perhaps one of the worst offenders since Neville Cooper himself is this man, Jonathan Benjamin. Between the years of 1986 and 2017, he repeatedly abused multiple Gloria Bell children. His victims said that the abuse would take place during community movie nights, in bedrooms, in the communal kitchen, in the shower, during choir practice, and this monster was even allowed to babysit the children in the cult, and he would abuse them while he was babysitting as well. One of the girls was only 5 years old at the time of the abuse. 20 different charges were brought against him across multiple victims, and in 2024, he was sentenced to 11 years and 10 months in prison. So this is the longest prison sentence we've seen so far. And do you want to know what the leaders would do if they ever found out about any of the abuse of the children? Well, the offender would be made to repent and make a public apology, and sometimes they would have to stay separate from the community for a short time. That's it. But it's not that surprising because, as we know, the leaders were doing similar things as well. Which brings me to our next Gloria Bell predator. This is 85-year-old Howard Temple. Before joining Gloria Bell back when the cult was just getting off the ground, he was known as Howard Smitherman, and he had been a United States Navy engineer. And in 2018, after Neville Cooper's death, he took over as overseeing shepherd. But in July of 2025, just last month, Howard Temple pleaded guilty to 5 charges of indecent assault, 5 of doing an indecent act, and 2 of common assault against both women and children.
The head of the Secret of Gloria Vale Christian Commune has admitted that community members were prevented from reporting abuse. And he conceded a policy of offenders repenting in front of the whole congregation may have been harmful to the victims.
A startling admission from the head of Gloria Vale.
Do you accept there has been intergenerational sexual abuse in your community?
Yes, I accept that on the police's report.
So you had a policy that prevented community members from reporting crimes to outside authorities?
Yes, according to that word, yes, that is correct.
Howard Temple is still awaiting sentencing, but I read that he is out on bail and he is living at Gloria Vale, but members claim that he's being kept far from the general population, but who knows if that's actually true. And supposedly the police are still investigating Gloria Vale. They're looking more into the allegations of slavery in Gloria Vale, but who knows, because it seems as though there have been so many chances to take Gloria Vale down over the years. They've had so many allegations against them. So many agencies have failed these people.
The agencies that have known for over 50 years the truth of what has been happening there, have they turned a blind eye? Or was it simply put in the too hard basket?
It's hard to know just how many victims and predators have resided in Gloriaville over the years, but I found this little section on the Gloriaville Leavers Support Trust website. According to this, as of 2024, police have identified more than 138 victims of physical and sexual abuse and more than 400 crimes committed, with 14 men being charged by 2023 and 18 currently under investigation. And there's no way that that's even the full picture, because you have to factor in people who are still too scared to come forward, or people who are still brainwashed and they think that the abuse is normal or it's their fault. There is a new leader since Howard Temple has pleaded guilty. This is 48-year-old Stephen Standfast, and he claims that he is bringing real change into the community. I guess we'll see. This, unfortunately, isn't just happening in New Zealand, because before he died, Neville decided that he wanted to branch out into other countries and establish sister communes, and he chose to do this in India. This boy's name is Faithful Stronghold, and Faithful was sent from India all the way to New Zealand to Gloriaville so that he could learn the ins and outs of how to run the cult so that he could go back to India to set up the sister commune. And then 5 of the Gloriaville girls were sent to India for the sole purpose of being married off to the men in the new sect and basically serving as slaves. The India sect is still up and running as well. Remember the former member Theo, who we talked about earlier? Her mother had the stillborn baby who was taken from her. Well, her sister, whose name is Precious, was among the girls that were sent to the India sect, and Theo had totally lost contact with her years ago. But during the filming of the documentary Escaping Utopia, Theo and another former member named Rosanna Overcomer traveled to India unannounced to see what was going on in that sect and to check on Theo's sister. And what they saw was not good. The people were living in inadequate conditions. There isn't even a door on the bathroom. This part of the documentary brought to light what many consider to be human trafficking. Those 5 girls were sent to India for the sole purpose of providing manual labor and populating the commune with children. And they did find Theo's sister, but she seemed very, I don't know how to describe it, like depressed. She just seemed like she was like dead inside. I don't know, but it was not good. Theo did get to meet her nieces and nephews, and it completely broke her heart to see them living the way they were.
In the state of Tamil Nadu in India,
We're here to check on those girls.
2 former members of Gloriaville's New Zealand chapter are on a mission. With hidden cameras rolling, their experience was documented in a multi-part series on TVNZ.
How's it going? Yes. Rosanna came with me.
What they found has in part prompted action from lawyer Deborah Manning.
I wrote to the relevant agencies raising concerns of what appears to be potential trafficking of women from Gloriaville to India and coerced marriage.
This woman, known as Precious, came to India 7 years ago after Gloriaville's leaders asked her to fly over and marry an Indian man. She didn't have her passport, and there appeared to be no formal record of the babies being born here. Gloriaville's leader in India, Faithful Stronghold, then made a disturbing admission when the visiting women raised concerns about sexual abuse.
What is rape? Raping it happens from one side. Yeah. Indian men are very forceful around women. It's part of the culture, and there's a lot of Indian men will force themselves onto a lot of women because of shortage of ladies in India.
And since the filming of the documentary, Theo has been fighting legal battles to hopefully get Precious and her nieces and nephews out of that cult. But she said it's been a very slow process. But thankfully, there is help on the outside. And over the years, dozens of people have started to flee Gloriaville. The Gloriaville Leavers Support Trust was started by Liz and Graham Gregory in 2019. They felt this very strong desire to help the people of Gloriaville escape and try to find some joy in life. And they just kind of like poured their hearts into this organization. Not only do they help people leave the cult, but they also provide housing and essential items for them so they'll have an easier time adjusting and getting their footing. They help them financially. They provide them with emotional support, because leaving a place that you lived in your entire life is traumatic. It takes a lot of courage to walk away from everything that you know. I will leave a link to the Leavers website if you want to make a donation. I will be making a donation. Actually, I'm going to do it right now. And the trust has grown over the years. There are even former Gloriaville members who are affiliated with this trust. Judy Christian is a former member who escaped in 2016, and Elijah and Rosanna Overcomer left in 2013 with their children after Elijah questioned the leadership when he learned that Neville Cooper had been convicted of a sexual assault back in the 90s. And since they all escaped, they've been actively helping others to leave and get on their feet. Remember Pearl and Paul Valor, the young married couple that we saw earlier in the video? Well, Pearl is actually Rosanna Overcomer's sister. And Pearl and her husband Paul finally left Gloriaville back in 2021. Pearl was also one of the former members involved in that employment lawsuit against the cult. And I love seeing side-by-side comparisons of these women. It makes me so happy to see how far they've come and to see them, wearing clothes that they want to and makeup if they want to. And they're no longer living their lives to serve men. You can see the change on their faces. They look confident and happy.
Gloriaville feels like they're victims in this case. And they are victims, but not of this case. They're victims of the culture they've created, and that's what we want to see changed. We want to see the culture changed.
And remember this girl, Lilia, we heard from her in this interview. Well, I'm glad to say that she has also escaped the cult, and she has gone on to live a very successful life. She's also written a book about her experience in Gloriaville, and she's even given a TED Talk.
What does it mean to love myself so fully that if anyone ever tries to shame me again, I am the first to stand up for myself?
Over the years, it's estimated that at least 300 people have left Gloriaville, but as of 2024, there are still about 600 people in the cult, with more than half of that population being children. And we know these kids are not safe in that community. I just hope that the authorities finally start taking this seriously and something substantial will finally be done. And that is all I have on this case. Please let me know what you think about this one down in the comments. This video is probably going to be very long, and I feel like I've barely touched on some things, so go watch the documentary Escaping Utopia. It's kind of hard to find in certain regions, but I highly recommend checking it out if you can manage to access it. It's very well done, and the former members give so much more insight than I ever could, so you should definitely watch it. Don't forget, you can click the link in the description box and try out Wild Grain, and you'll get $30 off your first box and free croissants for life. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing, liking this video, and leaving me a comment. That is the easiest way for you to support me and my channel. And as always, I appreciate each and every one of you for watching, and I will see you next time.